Hollywood's greatest trick has never been its visual effects, its star power, or its monumental budgets. Its real magic lies in its ability to hide the truth. For every action film that dazzles on screen, there is another story buried just out of sight, a story of frantic decisions, collapsing scripts and productions held together by sheer determination. While audiences imagine these films being crafted with perfect clarity, many of them were created in the shadow of confusion and constant reinvention. Some movies began with a clear direction only to lose their footing halfway through shooting. Others spent months rewriting scenes that had already been filmed, scrambling to repair plots that no longer made sense. And in several cases, the final version that reached theaters was completely different from the one the cast believed they were making. Behind the camera, actors performed moments stripped of context. Directors adjusted their vision day by day, hoping to salvage coherence from a script that kept shifting beneath their feet. Studios demanded new endings, new tones, new identities, all while the cameras were still rolling. The chaos was hidden, the panic disguised, and the truth swept under layers of marketing polish. Tonight, we step into that hidden world. We press into the off-limits corners of 15 action films that carried secret turbulence within them, movies reshaped in silence, rebuilt under pressure, and reborn without the audience ever knowing what took place behind the scenes. These are the blockbusters that hid their most frightening truth not within the story but in the making of it. Welcome to 15 action movies that hid a terrifying secret behind the camera. Let's turn to the first film, FILM 1, The Bourne Identity 2002. When The Bourne Identity entered production, the film's creators believed they had a solid script, sharp, lean, and built for a new breed of spy thriller. But almost as soon as the cameras rolled, the story began slipping through everyone's hands. Scenes were rewritten overnight, new pages arrived on set at dawn, and Matt Damon frequently found himself learning dialogue hours before performing it. The tension between director Joe Liman and the studio only deepened the chaos. Liman pushed for a more psychological, atmospheric tone, while Universal demanded clearer exposition and bigger commercial moments. This tug-of-war resulted in a script that behaved like a living organism, changing shape again and again as the production traveled through Europe. Even the film's emotional climax didn't exist until long after principal photography wrapped. The original ending was abandoned, forcing the team to craft a new final scene that completely altered Marie and Bourne's arc. What the audience eventually embraced as a fresh, grounded approach to espionage cinema was the outcome of a production constantly reinventing itself mid-flight. FILM 2 World War Z 2013. What began as Brad Pitt's grand globe-trotting zombie epic quickly unraveled under the weight of its own ambition. Halfway through the shoot, the filmmakers realized the narrative didn't hold together. Characters drifted, action sequences felt disconnected, and the original ending, an enormous battle in Russia, simply couldn't deliver the emotional payoff the story needed. Paramount halted everything. Writers were brought in to rebuild the third act from the ground up, while footage from the unfinished middle of the film was still being reviewed. The new ending took the movie in an entirely different direction. Smaller, more suspenseful, more intimate. Pitt was called back for extensive reshoots, essentially filming a new film within the film. Massive sequences already shot were abandoned. Entire subplots were erased. The movie that reached theaters was in many ways a second version, reshaped under enormous pressure to save a project that had drifted far off course. Yet the public never knew how close it came to collapsing. FILM 3, Die Hard 1988. It's hard to believe that one of the most beloved action movies of all time was built on a patchwork of constantly shifting ideas. During the filming of Die Hard, the script was in such flux that actors often didn't know what their character's motivations were from day to day. Bruce Willis discovered new story directions in the same rhythm that John McClane discovered danger suddenly and without warning. The villain's agenda evolved, repeatedly moving from ideology to greed as the filmmakers searched for the right tone. Humor, which would become a defining feature of the film, wasn't originally emphasized. It emerged organically through late-night writing sessions and improvised lines. Even the iconic catchphrase that followed Willis for decades wasn't in the early drafts. It was sparked by spontaneity on set. By the time shooting ended, the finished film bore little resemblance to the script that began the project. What should have been a disaster instead became a landmark of the genre, shaped not by planning, but by the creative alchemy of a team adapting on instinct. FILM 4, Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, 2016. Few fans suspect that one of the most celebrated modern entries in the Star Wars universe was forged through a quiet, creative battle behind the scenes. Rogue One began as a grounded war story with a darker edge, but as the shoot progressed, the studio grew uneasy about the tone. They wanted clearer emotional beats, firmer motivations, and a finale aligned with the franchise's mythic spirit. As the pressure mounted, Tony Gilroy was brought in discreetly to reshape the narrative while filming was still underway. Scenes were rewritten, dialogue was reshaped, and major story elements were reconsidered. Much of the footage shown in early trailer shots that defined the film's gritty marketing was later discarded because entire sequences had been rewritten from scratch. By the time cameras stopped rolling Rogue One had become a merged vision. The atmospheric brutality Gareth Edwards sought intertwined with the structural and character refinements introduced during Gilroy's rewrites. The seamless final product masks a process filled with shifting priorities and hidden reinvention. FILM 5 Lethal Weapon 2 1989, what began as a raw, emotionally heavy sequel, transformed mid-production into the more comedic, high-energy film audiences now remember. The early script for Lethal Weapon 2 followed a far darker path, one that pushed Martin Riggs toward a tragic ending. Richard Donner shot the initial material with that intensity, leaning into the psychological fallout established in the first film. But as filming continued, the studio pushed for a lighter direction. They wanted humor, accessibility, and franchise longevity. Writers were rotated through the production, reshaping scenes as they were being filmed. Joe Pesci's character, initially minor, expanded rapidly to bring levity into the story. Action scenes, originally designed with somber realism, evolved into stylized, crowd-pleasing set pieces. The shift eventually erased the original ending altogether. Instead of descending into tragedy, Riggs survived, setting the stage for future sequels. The film the world saw was a hybrid, half its DNA rooted in early darkness, the other half rewritten to meet studio demands as production marched forward. FILM 6 Suicide Squad 2016. No film in recent memory reflects mid-shoot reinvention quite as dramatically as Suicide Squad. The film that was initially shot carried a brooding psychological tone, shadowy, intense, and bleak. Then the trailer dropped, pulsing with neon colors and chaotic energy. It went viral instantly, and the studio panicked. The trailer's style didn't match the movie they had made. Determined to capitalize on the trailer's success, executives ordered a re-engineering of the film's identity. New scenes were added, structured around humor and rapid-fire pacing. The editing team from the trailer was brought in to assist with crafting the new rhythm. Subplots were trimmed or removed entirely, and the Joker's presence was dramatically reduced. The final result was a film stitched from two different creative impulses, one grim and introspective, the other loud and stylistically reckless. The clash between these visions can still be felt in the finished product, a movie that tries to mask its fractured identity behind bold visuals and quick cuts. FILM 7 Men in Black 3 2012 from the outside Men in Black 3 looks like a smooth time-bending adventure. But on set, the production became a model of uncertainty. The film started shooting before the writers had actually cracked the full story, which meant the cast and crew stepped into a narrative that didn't yet have a clear direction. After completing the opening act, the entire production was forced into a long hiatus, an unusual and expensive decision because the creative team still hadn't figured out how the middle and ending should work. During this pause, multiple writers were brought in, each proposing a different emotional path. Will Smith pushed for a deeper, more heartfelt journey between Jay and the young Kay, while the studio leaned toward a more comedic tone that matched the franchise's identity. By the time filming resumed, much of what had already been shot no longer fit the newly revised storyline. Character arcs were rebuilt. Emotional beats were restructured, and several scenes had to be reshaped in editing to maintain continuity. The finished film feels cohesive, but only because the post-production team carefully hid the evidence of a story that had been rewritten from the ground up. FILM 8 Mission Impossible Rogue Nation 2015. Despite the franchise's reputation for precision, Rogue Nation was created under conditions that were anything but controlled. As filming began, the script's biggest hole was glaring: the final act didn't exist. Christopher McQuarrie had to build the narrative backwards, rewriting scenes in real time as Tom Cruise performed elaborate stunts that had been conceived before the story that justified them. Major sequences, like the Opera House mission, were constantly revised as McQuarrie adjusted tone, pacing, and character dynamics. Ilsa Faust's shifting loyalties proved particularly challenging, leading to new pages being delivered throughout the shoot. Eventually, production halted entirely so McQuarrie could design the ending he had been delaying from the start. When the cameras rolled again, the film's new finale gave the narrative cohesion it desperately needed. Yet the polished final product hides the truth. This was a blockbuster built through instinct, improvisation, and last-minute reinvention, rather than a neatly planned script. FILM 9 Edge of Tomorrow 2014, what ended up as one of the most tightly engineered action films of its era, was behind the scenes a constant experiment in finding the right tone. Edge of Tomorrow struggled to balance dark sci-fi intensity with moments of deadpan humor, and that struggle led to near-continuous rewriting throughout production. Emily Blunt and Tom Cruise often admitted they never knew which version of the script they would be performing on any given day. Director Doe Liman frequently reworked scenes during rehearsals, reshaping emotional beats and adjusting character arcs in real time. Some days leaned heavily into bleak drama, others swung toward wry comedy. The ending caused the most turmoil. Several conclusions were written, tested, and discarded. Some were filmed. None had the mix of punch and clarity the filmmakers needed until a final rewrite crafted late in the schedule finally locked the narrative into place. The result feels seamless, but underneath that smooth surface lies a film assembled through relentless trial and error. FILM 10, The Wolverine 2013. The Wolverine began as a deeply personal story, one meant to explore Logan's grief, trauma, and longing for escape. Drawing from the iconic Japanese arc, the film was initially conceived as a restrained character study rather than a traditional superhero spectacle, but midway through production, the creative path shifted dramatically. Studio executives grew uneasy about the film's quieter tone and pushed for a larger, more explosive finale. Overnight, the narrative was reshaped. Emotional scenes were shortened or reworked to make room for new action beats. Writers were flown in to draft major structural changes while the cast was already shooting the original material. The grounded climax that had been planned from the beginning was abandoned and rebuilt as a CGI-driven showdown featuring the towering Silver Samurai. Director James Mangold tried to hold on to the story's intimate core, but the production was steadily pulled toward blockbuster demands. The final film reflects both intentions, intimate in its bones, but forced to carry the weight of a last-minute transformation designed to satisfy the studio's ambitions. Film 11G I. Joe Retaliation 2013 from its first days on set GI. Joe Retaliation found itself wrestling with an identity crisis. The filmmakers were unsure whether they were creating a gritty military thriller or a stylized, over-the-top action romp. This uncertainty manifested in constant rewrites that altered the film's tone, pacing, and character dynamics, often while scenes were actively being filmed. Major story beats were revised repeatedly. Character fates changed mid-shoot. Channing Tatum's role, originally envisioned as a major presence, was sharply reduced after filming had already begun, forcing new scenes to be hastily written to justify his diminished involvement. The production's instability grew so severe that Paramount made an unusual decision. The movie's release was delayed by months. Officially, the delay was attributed to 3D conversion. Unofficially, it was used to repair narrative gaps and restructure scenes to make the film coherent. What audiences ultimately saw was a patchwork of rewritten material stitched together in editing and action film saved by reinvention rather than preparation.
Film 12 Iron Man 2008. Although Iron Man launched one of the most successful cinematic universes in history, its production was surprisingly chaotic.
When cameras started rolling, the script was still incomplete, leaving actors to improvise large portions of their dialogue and emotional beats. Robert Downey Jr. embraced this uncertainty, shaping Tony Stark's voice through spontaneous exchanges rather than scripted lines. Director Jon Favreau relied on outlines instead of fully formed scenes, adjusting story elements based on how the cast responded in the moment. The cave sequence, central to Stark's transformation, was rewritten repeatedly to find the right emotional resonance. Even the climactic battle with Ironmonger was conceived and refined, while the visual effects team was already designing major action moments. The entire film could easily have fallen apart. Instead, the improvisational energy became its defining strength. The lively, unpredictable tone that audiences fell in love with was born from a production forced to invent itself piece by piece, proof that sometimes the best stories come from creative chaos rather than rigid structure. Film 13, The Expendables 3, 2014. From the outset, The Expendables 3 was envisioned as a return to the franchise's gritty, unapologetically violent roots. Early drafts leaned heavily into R-rated brutality, and the cast filmed several intense sequences reflecting that tone. But then in the middle of production, the studio delivered a game-changing demand. The movie had to earn a PG-13 rating. That single decision sent shockwaves through the entire creative process. Action scenes already filmed were suddenly too graphic. Jokes and dialogue designed for an adult audience had to be rewritten. Stunt coordinators hurried to redesign set pieces to soften their impact. Writers rushed to produce new pages that matched a gentler tone, while editors scrambled to find ways to repurpose or entirely remove scenes that no longer fit the film's new identity. By the end, the movie no longer resembled the version the cast had originally signed on to. It became a hybrid stitched together under immense pressure, guided not by creative vision, but by the studio's mid-shoot pivot toward broader market appeal. FILM 14 Quantum of Solace 2008, the production of Quantum of Solace collided headfirst with the Writers Guild strike, leaving the filmmakers with an unfinished script and no legal ability to rewrite it. As a result, director Mark Forster and Daniel Craig were thrust into an unprecedented situation. They had to reinterpret, reshape, and often invent scenes on their own, while the shoot was already underway. Entire sections of the story were vague or incomplete, forcing the team to push forward with action sequences, first hoping the connective tissue could be constructed later in the editing room. Characters shifted purpose, motivations changed on the fly, and many scenes had to be rewritten in a DR long after filming wrapped. The team essentially reverse-engineered a narrative using material that had been created without a solid structural foundation. The final film carries the fingerprints of this improvisational process. Its jagged pacing, abrupt tonal shifts, and fragmented storytelling all echo the chaos behind the curtain. It remains one of the most unusual productions in Bond history, built as much in desperation as in design. FILM 15, The Dark Tower 2017, attempting to condense Stephen King's expansive mythology into a single feature film, proved far more complicated than the studio expected. As the shoot progressed, it became apparent that the story's tone and structure weren't connecting. The creative team couldn't agree on whether the film should embrace King's darker fantasy elements or pursue a broader, more accessible adventure. Rewrites soon became constant. Actors received new pages throughout production, sometimes shortly before stepping onto set. Character arcs were altered mid-shoot, relationships reimagined, and key world-building elements rewritten in an effort to simplify the narrative. When early test screenings revealed audience confusion, the studio ordered additional reshoots, inserting new exposition scenes designed to clarify the mythology. The finished film carries the marks of multiple competing visions. It feels like several different interpretations of the same story layered on top of each other, each leaving behind traces of its influence. What audiences saw was the product of a production engaged in an ongoing struggle to define what the movie was supposed to be. BONUSFACT Mad Max Fury Road 2015. On the surface, Mad Max Fury Road appears almost impossibly precise. Every chase sequence, sculpted with detail, every frame, bursting with purpose. Yet behind this immaculate exterior was a production defined by unpredictability and constant reinvention. The script functioned more like a vast visual map than a traditional screenplay presenting outlines of action, rather than a fixed narrative structure. Filming in the unforgiving Namibian desert only deepened the turbulence. Sandstorms routinely reshaped the landscape, forcing director George Miller to rethink entire sequences on a moment's notice. Scenes he had meticulously planned for years suddenly became unworkable, prompting overnight revisions and on-the-spot reimagining. Cast members often admitted they were unsure where their characters stood emotionally because the story shifted as nature dictated. Tension simmered on set as Miller worked late into the night, adjusting sequences that had fallen apart during the day. Some of the film's most unforgettable action runs were reconstructed in post-production, assembled from fragments captured across months of extreme chaotic conditions. Even the final act evolved dramatically during the shoot and again during editing as the team searched for the most powerful way to bring the journey to its climax. What emerged was nothing short of astonishing, a masterpiece carved out of disorder, shaped by instinct and perseverance rather than stability. Beneath the flawless exterior of Fury Road lies a filmmaking odyssey held together by grit, ingenuity, and a refusal to surrender to the chaos surrounding it. Hollywood's shine is dazzling, but its shadows tell the real stories. If these hidden truths drew you deeper, to tonight, remember, there are countless more secrets waiting just beyond the edge of the spotlight. This channel is where those concealed moments, buried decisions, and whispered histories finally surface. Stay with us. Subscribe and step further into the world that Hollywood never intended for the public eye. Because here, behind the velvet curtain, the truth always finds its way out.